Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined by my co-host, Ari Coleman. Hello, Ari.
Well, howdy, everybody.
At this point, you're going to have to come up with a new one of those for every episode at this point.
That was my plan.
Okay, good. I'm just making sure, because the ideas aren't always going to flow so easily. You're going to need to get super creative at some point. So
exactly.
Just want to make sure you're ready for that, is all.
I try my best.
So this is episode 49. You know what that means?
It means next time is episode 50.
Right? Like we've almost made
Party
50
time.
episodes of the show. That's crazy.
I've been on like 3 episodes of the show.
Well, and this will be cool because this will be the first episode that's just you and me. We don't have any guests. We're just, yeah, no one loves us. We are going to be doing some queer myth busting today. So we thought it would be fun to just kind of go through some of the more common myths about atheists and all different sorts of flavors of LGBT folks, and just kind of go through what, some silly things that people believe, why they believe them, and why they are just wrong. So I think most of the folks who listen to the show are probably atheists. I know not all are.
That tends to be our kind of crowd.
Right. So, but, I figured the first segment we could just go ahead and give our take on some of the more common atheist myths. Ari, do you have a favorite?
Oh, man, there are so many, especially since my last 2 years of high school, I went to a Christian high school, and we took a class called Biblical Worldview. Oh, and God. My senior year of Biblical Worldview was devoted to other worldviews, so why they're all wrong. And of course, one of them was secular humanism and why it's wrong. So a lot of that was secular humanists think that they are their own God. They worship themselves. They just want to sin. Yeah,
so you kind of broke these down into different subtopics, which I think is cool. So a lot of the arguments have to do with the nature of atheism, such as like the reasons why people are atheists. And basically what it comes down to is, for people who aren't, basically it's like people are atheists for any reason other than an honest evaluation of the facts at hand. So one that's that I think is kind of an interesting discussion is that this idea of choice, and obviously this comes up with LGBT folks as well. Whether or not we choose to be the way that we are. But I also think that there's an interesting discussion to be had about beliefs and what we do and don't believe, and whether or not there's choice involved in that. And I think there are a lot of arguments from the theistic side that kind of come down to that, like, well, you're just choosing not to believe. And and I think to myself, like, well, I can't just choose to believe that if I jump off a building, I'm going to fly, because I just know that's not the case, because I've been convinced by the evidence, and everything that I've seen is when, you lose the thing out from under you, you fall, because that's what gravity does. And
right.
In my head, theistic beliefs are the same way. It's, we're either convinced by argument or evidence, or we're not convinced. And that being convinced, I'm not entirely sure is something that's 100% under our control.
It's kind of like the whole argument we're going to get into later, some myths about LGBT people, but one of the myths is...
It's weird how many of those cross connect, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody should do a podcast about that. Sorry.
One of the myths about LGBT people is, one of the more common ones, obviously, is that you chose to be whatever and it's just a lifestyle, or, that kind of argument. And the best way, I think, to argue against that is if someone, for example, is saying, well, you chose to be gay. Okay, well, when did you choose to be straight? It's got to work both ways. You can't choose to be gay and not choose to be straight. You have to choose one or the other, of course, because there are only two options in the whole world.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think it's the same thing, with theism versus atheism. When did you choose to be a theist? When did you choose to believe in God? Did you just go suddenly from believing in God to, I think it would be nice if I believed in God, and now I believe in God?
Well, in the problem with that is a lot of people will tell you yes to that question. They will tell you that I chose to believe. And I don't know, maybe there's some intellectual dishonesty happening there. Maybe they actually believe it. I don't know. That's, there's something to be interesting to said about the nature of belief and, where choices come into play, because there's selective bias and what sorts of evidence you choose to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. But, even then, cognitive bias is something that's built into us as human beings. So it's not like somebody a lot of times is consciously choosing to ignore the evidence. It's that people are kind of hardwired to ignore things that don't reinforce their worldviews. And that goes for all of us.
Yes.
I think I can make the argument that atheists may be slightly less prone to it because most of us didn't start as atheists, so we've already changed our mind.
A culture that is predominantly religious, especially Christian.
Exactly,
at least in the U.S. anyway.
Right. So we've already changed our mind about one huge thing. So maybe that's only a slight thing, because I've also read a lot of stuff saying that even awareness of cognitive bias doesn't make you less susceptible to it.
Not necessarily. But sometimes.
So we might just be, we might just be screwed on that whole thing.
The point is to look at all sorts of different types of evidence, use your critical thinking skills, evaluate things as they come to you. Don't take people's word for it. Exactly.
Another good one is the argument that you're an atheist because it's a fad, because it's the trendy thing to be now. And this sort of goes along with the argument about you're trying to rebel, or you're trying to be
right.
different and be cool, and this goes, basically anytime someone strays from anything mainstream, that's what you hear. You're just doing this to be cool, But, and to be fair, honestly, maybe that's true. You know what I mean? Maybe some people do, because I went to school with a lot of people who were like, I just think it's funny to piss off religious people, so I'm just going to say all kinds of bad things about religion. And, if you talk to these people, they were just intellectually vacuous. They really had no deep thoughts whatsoever about the topic. They were just doing it to be contrarian. And I am sure there are plenty of people like that exist.
Yes. Not everyone is an atheist for good reason.
Exactly. And not everyone who is atheist is intelligent. Not everyone who is atheist is moral. We'll get there. But and to be fair, atheism is trending. It's if you lump nuns in as a group when you're talking about religious beliefs and the people who hold them, my understanding is that we are the fastest growing group.
Yes.
Of religion in the country, being non-religious, and also, in fairness to the numbers, those are people who don't necessarily identify themselves as atheists. They just don't affiliate with a religion, which to me is almost better, more like a post-theistic kind of thing, where we don't even give religion the credit of being the default, which I think atheism does. I think that may be a weakness of asserting the atheist point of view.
And hereby, Callie renounces her atheism.
Right, yeah. Well, and I remember when Dawkins said he was a 6 on the scale, because you can never be 100% certain of anything. I mean, there were literally Christian websites the next day that said Dawkins renounces his atheism, which is just silly.
That's just a misunderstanding of what atheism means.
Right. Well, and like I said, I think in a world where where Christianity is still the default. I mean, we live in a country where 70% of people identify as Christian. I do think there is value in adopting a label to set ourselves apart from that. But I think the goal at the end of the day is to live in a post-theistic society where the default is just to be a nun. You don't have to identify yourself as an atheist or anything like that. But I do think it's necessary in this day and age, anyways.
Yeah, it's the same thing like we talk about once again with queerness and transness. Like, labels exist and they exist to set you apart from a certain thing, but in the end, our goal is to not have to rely on these kind of labels for everyone to be accepted for who they are. But at the moment, we're living in a society where labels are important. So that's why we use them.
Right. Well, labels are fine. Boxes are not. I think people attach a little bit too much importance to labels in saying that, well, if you're this, you're this. When people think the word atheist, I'm going to go out on a limb and say most people, when they think of the word atheist, they don't just think a lack of belief or disbelief in a god or gods. Like,
yes,
when I hear the word atheist, I think about community and I think about all the amazing people that I know in the community and things like that. So, it's important to not attach boxes to labels, I guess is what it really comes down to. If you're trans, that means that you don't agree with the sex you were assigned at birth. Full stop. Period. Like,
that's it.
That's all that definitively means about you. You can probably make some guesses based on the experiences of most trans people, but definitively, all it means is the definition of the word. It doesn't have to mean anything else. Mm-hmm. So another good one is they always say that that we're our own gods and we worship ourselves as gods, which is hilarious.
Yes, that was a huge thing when I went to Christian high school. That was, the whole argument, not the whole argument, but a lot of the argument against secular humanism or atheism, these nebulous terms, is that, they are so conceited. They think that they are the most important thing in the universe and that they can set reality for themselves and they can set morals for themselves, whereas we believe that there is a good and just God who sets these rules for us, and we exist to worship this God as opposed to worshiping ourselves. So wouldn't you rather be somebody who is humble rather than someone who is conceited and thinks that you are your own God?
Well, and part of me just wants to be like, these people should be in my head in the times when I'm having like a self-esteem crisis. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could be guilty. I could be accused of being guilty of having a high opinion of myself under certain circumstances, but I most certainly do not worship myself as a god, and I don't know anyone who does.
I have never heard of such a person, unless someone is, for example, maybe has schizophrenia and thinks that they are Jesus. That's
right, which
the only
happens.
example I can think of. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and if my understanding of LaVeyan Satanism is correct, there's a little bit of that going on there. It's not worshiping yourself as an atheistic god, as in like you're like the owner and creator of everything and that you're better than everything else, which is kind of
right.
That's kind of the implication in the argument. Mm-hmm. And what's hilarious is, I mean, if you listen to all of these atheist philosophers talk, like they all literally say like, we're a speck on a speck on a speck on a speck, like in the grand cosmic scale, like we mean basically nothing.
Yeah. I think the confusion for a lot of theists, especially like fundamentalists, Protestant Christians, which is the kind of school that I went to, is they're kind of confusing the idea of the setting your own goals for your own life I think a lot of them kind of conflate that with thinking that you are like the end all and be all of the universe. That you're setting your own morals, for example, like, oh, if I think this is cool, then this is cool. And everyone has to agree with me because I'm the best and I'm an atheist. And if there's no God, then I can just do whatever I want. There's definitely a huge difference between living within the moral boundaries that we have decided to set as a society, and on top of that, adding your own kind of goals and your own personal ethical guidelines that you choose to live by, and imposing that on everyone and saying that anything that I say is the correct way and the way that things should be.
That's a good point. So in the interest of not talking past each other and, doing the whole straw man thing, what you're saying is that because we don't believe in a God, generally speaking, atheists think, well, we get to choose what direction our life goes in. And, our purpose in life is what we make it. And that's seen as kind of a rebellion against God's plan. And that's kind of where they get the, like, we're trying to take the place of God in our own lives kind of thing.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right.
Which,
at least my understanding.
Obviously, we would disagree with. But I think it is important to understand where these folks are coming from on these kind of things. If for nothing else, so, when you're in a conversation, you can say, like, hey, that's actually not the case, and here's where the misunderstanding might be. I think that's I think that's a good one. And then see, the last two, they kind of go together. That, atheism means only one thing, that, anyone who claims to be atheist is, definitively and beyond definitively against the idea of a God existing, and is not open to evidence or anything like that. And that atheism is a religion in itself. Which, like, I'm not a huge fan of using, like, sentence catchphrases or memes to respond to things, because obviously, like, you're never going to suss out an entire subject in a sentence or a meme. But the perfect response to the atheism as a religion argument is the idea that, if atheism is a religion, then abstinence is a sex position.
Or off is a TV channel. That's what I've heard before. Yeah.
Like, that's literally what it is. Like, it really does boil down to being that simple. So that one we can kind of just step aside. I would venture to say there are probably people who are as zealous about atheism as people are about religion.
Oh yeah, there are definitely atheists out there who say that there definitely is no God and that they know this for a fact, but that's not my personal position.
Right, which is all fine. I mean, after listening to a bunch of different philosophical stuff, I'm comfortable with a positive assertion that God doesn't exist. That's a really, really long argument into itself.
Let the mail flow in.
Right. I'm comfortable with a positive assertion that there is no God. Saying that that's the definitive or final word, I think is a little much, because obviously we have to be open to evidence, and there's the whole idea of not being able to prove a negative and all of that sort of fun stuff. So, and then the next kind of category that you have here is arguments from morality and awe, and this all kind of goes together.
Right.
That, atheists can't have a moral center, that we can't appreciate beauty, and this idea that we know in our hearts that God actually exists and that we're just rebelling, which presuppositionalist arguments drive me nuts.
Yep, I was at the Matt Dillahunty, Cy Ten Broek and Kate debate in Memphis, and that was one of the most frustrating things I've experienced in my life.
Oh my God, I remember listening to that in my car, like, I want to strangle this guy. I am not a violent person, but oh my God, I want him to stop talking.
Don't do it, Callie.
No, I'm not going to.
Listen to your atheist morals. Don't strangle people.
Right. Yeah, and the idea that we can't have morals, I mean, I would go back to, the idea that, first of all, I would argue that most religious people don't get their morality in its entirety from their holy books. They cherry pick it based on what they already sort of know and believe to be true, which is why, certain parts of the Bible are emphasized by certain people and ignored by others. Like, I mean, that's pretty obvious to me. And even like, if we accept the argument that the Old Testament is the Old Covenant and none of that stuff no longer applies, there's plenty in the New Testament to make me want to throw something too. Like, a woman's
slaves obey your masters.
Well, right. And, a woman's not permitted to have authority over a man, or you're not allowed to speak in church and all this kind of stuff. Like, people ignore that kind of stuff, and, religions change and evolve over time. I'm glad they do. I wish they would do it faster. To be clear,
get with the times, religion.
I am not shy about calling religions out on cherry picking, but I'm also glad they do.
It would be not a good world we lived in if everyone who was a religious believer was a complete and total literalist and fundamentalist.
Because I'm not entirely sure that I buy the Old Covenant, New Covenant. So like Old Testament stuff doesn't apply. I'm not sure I entirely buy that, but like I am at the same time glad that there are relatively few people who actually want to stone me. So like, I mean, I think that's some kind of progress, at least a little bit.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think you can derive morality from evidence and from science and from it in what most people would describe in an objective way. I don't think atheist morality necessarily has to be subjective. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that we just come up with on our own. Right. I think, we can become aware of facts about human well-being and human suffering. And, this will all sound familiar to anyone who's heard Sam Harris or Matt Dillahunty talk about morality.
Yeah, I was going to say, see several Matt Dillahunty talks for more, more information about this.
And The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris. Sam Harris has become kind of problematic as far as trans and social justice stuff goes, but
that's not to say he is wrong about everything, of course.
Well, right. And, that being said, The Moral Landscape, I think, is a fantastic argument for secular morality, and that we can have objective secular morality. I 100% believe that. And then the other one is that we can't appreciate beauty. And I don't really know how to respond to that other than to just say, well, yeah, I can. Like, who are you to tell me that I can't appreciate beauty?
Yeah, there's this whole, especially among, pretty fundamentalist religious people who deny evolution and believe entirely in creationism, that there's this whole argument that, if God didn't create you and you're just, random chance and everything in this world is just, random and evolution, then how can it be that, you appreciate the beauty and the power of the natural world? And to me, that makes me appreciate it more, because we weren't just created on the whims of some person or being. The fact that we are so unlikely to have existed, and that we still do exist, and that we exist in, this, we have all this intelligence and these emotions that evolved naturally, that weren't just bestowed to us from some being. It makes it even more mysterious, and it piques my curiosity even more. It makes me want to, study the natural world and study psychology to find out, how is it that we became the way we are, rather than we're just this way because we poofed into existence from God. Absolutely. And, that's one of the things that I tell people is, being an atheist doesn't necessarily make you a nihilist. I mean, we definitely are, our worldview does entail the fact that there's no greater cosmic meaning to anything, and that, when we die, who and what we are ceases to be. At that point, we don't exist as a person anymore, except obviously, in the memories of other people, and, the legacy that we leave, for the people who were close to us. But, I don't know that really changes anything for me, because, I'm here now. I have the experiences that I have. I experience love. I experience beauty. I experience awe. And, I just want to leave the place better than I found it. And, if
in 1 trillion years from now, everything goes poof and none of that matters, well, I'm not going to be around to care about it anyways. But, while we're here, why not make this existence as good as it can be while it's here? Because as far as we know, it's the only one. So why not? The fact that everything ends is more of a motivator for me to make things great, because it's the only chance I get to do it, I don't get a second chance as far as I know. Like, this is what I've got. So it's far more motivating for me to do good things and to care about people, because I know that's all I've got. So
absolutely experience everything that you want to experience while you're here, because there might not be another chance.
Mm-hmm. And then the last section is myths about atheists as people. And God, there are lots of these. Things like, we hate God, something bad happened to us at church, or, we were hurt by a clergy person, or that, we're all these angry, horrible people who just want to bash everyone and make fun of everyone, or that, you were never really a Christian because...
Or insert whatever
now.
Religion you believed in.
Exactly. Yeah. What's funny is I don't know if anybody even knows it. Like there's a movement in the hardcore music scene called straight edge, and I used to claim straight edge, and I didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't do drugs, I didn't have sex with anyone I wasn't in a serious relationship with, and all that kind of stuff.
You had sex before marriage?
Right, yeah,
No.
I know. I'm terrible.
You're not truly straight edge.
I'm going to hell at least 50 times.
Mm-hmm.
But what a lot of the more hardline people in that movement will say, if you're not now, you never were. So if you break edge or you sell out, then you were never really that to begin with, which is just the stupidest argument in the world.
Yeah. That's at least in the kind of Christianity that I was raised in and the kind of school that I went to. There was kind of a Calvinist bent. Calvinism is kind of the idea that there are, it's going along with the idea that God is, omniscient and has planned everything out ahead of time. So anyone who becomes a Christian, it's because God has specifically planned that person to become a Christian. And if they're not a Christian, it's because God has specifically planned them not to become a Christian, which is pretty much damning them to hell.
I created you to suffer for eternity. Thanks,
exactly. God. So these sort of people with Calvinist kind of beliefs often believe that if, for example, you believe in Christianity and then you don't believe in Christianity, well, you weren't truly one of the elect, because if God had actually chosen you, then you wouldn't even have the power to deny him. It's kind of, all set in stone.
That makes sense.
Yes.
It makes sense in that context.
Yeah. This is what happens when you kind of have all of these contradictory beliefs about a God, whereas he's all good and all loving and omniscient and all powerful, but also you have free will. This is how you kind of mash those two things together.
Right. Well, so the other common one that we hear is, that we're mad at God, or that we're mad at the church, or, we're mad because something bad happened in the church, or we went to the wrong church or something like that. And, I have met so many atheists who actually really enjoyed their time at church and really valued it. And it was actually a traumatic experience leaving once they realized that religion didn't make sense to them anymore. My own exit from Christianity was really uneventful. I went to church with my grandma, as far as I know. I really believed this stuff, and I really was super stoked on Jesus and meeting Jesus in heaven one day. And I just kind of realized that it all didn't make sense to me. So I just stopped believing it. There was never, no one was abusive or mean to me or anything like that in terms of, religion. It just stopped making sense. So I stopped believing it. It's really as simple as that for a lot of people. And, I do think a lot of people start questioning their beliefs because something bad happened. And it turns into the, why would a loving God let this kind of thing happen to me? if someone was sexually assaulted or, a loved one died in a really horrible way or something along those lines, like a lot of people start their doubts because of something like that. But I've never met a person who straight up says like, I don't believe in God because my pastor was a jerk to me.
Yeah, I was listening to a recent episode of No Religion Required on Secular Media Network. Check it out.
Hey, y'all.
Had a guest on, I believe her name was Morgan. I don't remember her last name. I'm sorry. But she was talking about her experience with going to a religious boarding school. And she talked about, the lead up to going to that school. And when she was kind of a young, I believe she was in her early teens or maybe like before 10 years old or something like that. Her mother passed away, and she still believed in God after that, but she believed that God hated her because God was making all these, all these terrible things happen to her and happen in her life, like taking her mother away. So, that was definitely a traumatic thing for her to lose her mother, but she still believed in God. She just believed that God was, an angry God and was punishing her.
Oh my God, I couldn't imagine that. I mean, just putting yourself in the position of someone who thinks that way and, thinking like, wow, the creator of the universe has a grudge against me. Like, and I mean, that's not even being funny. I mean, to really believe that's gotta be so incredibly traumatic. And, and I think that, that comes back to why it's important to talk about these things, because this stuff causes real harm to real people. It's not just like some silly thing that's like, oh, people just believe in things that aren't true. It's funny and blah, blah, blah. Like that stuff it causes real harm to people. God, that's awful. I can't even imagine that. Yeah. And then, the whole atheist is being angry trope, like, I mean, just listen to No Religion Required, is what I'm saying.
Or us. You can listen to us too.
Us too.
We're pretty
us
cool,
too.
I guess.
But like, I'm just like, if you wanna hear what a super, super happy, super big hearted, like unbelievably, like just good people, like listen to that show, and that will absolutely destroy the argument. I mean, I'll go ahead and brag on us too. We're pretty cool, but I'm just saying, like,
if Miss Ashley is listening to this episode, she is crying right now.
Right. But yeah, I just, it's obviously those people exist, but let's not pretend that angry Christians and angry Muslims don't exist too. But angry atheists, generally speaking, don't suicide bomb or attack abortion clinics either, so that's kind of a false equivalency.
Womp womp.
But I'll cap it off by saying this. When we were at ReasonCon, there was a couple there where I believe the husband was an atheist and his wife was a Christian, and somebody asked her what she thought of the conference, and her response was, "There are so many people smiling and hugging each other." And it was so funny that she was so shocked at that.
What? Atheists are social creatures?
Right. Like, I guess she just thought it was this thing where, like, people just sit around and yell and get angry and bash God the whole time, when it was really like, and I mean, sure, some of that happens, if you listen to the talks.
And there's a place for that. There's definitely a place for, righteous, in quotes, anger against the harms that religion has done.
But generally speaking, it's people laughing, having a good time, hugging each other, hanging out, making connections and networking. And that's, that's what that is. Like, I've had so many people ask me, like, what do you do at an atheist convention?
Kill babies.
Yeah. Like
gay sex and baby barbecue.
Sacrifice. God, that's dumb. Okay, well, we're a little over time for this segment, so we're gonna go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we're gonna debunk some queer myths. More Gaytheist Manifesto coming up.
I'm Carly Sturgis, the host of the Token Skeptic podcast. Since 2006, I've been interviewing people from around the world: scientists, comedians, artists, and activists, and some of them you might even recognize.
the powers of the placebo are so strong that maybe it's wrong of us to mock.
And we happened to be in London around the time because we were shooting for the war and everything, and we basically made our own little sign, entreating the London commuters to bow down to the Dark Lord Satan, just to try and even out.
Some of them you might like to get to know better after hearing them on the show.
Reading into it, in fact, for years I've been interested in the concept of science philosophy and how pseudoscience works. And
it's then very easy for people to just, throw us away and say, well, you don't have a heart, or you're closed-minded, or, and so...
And the origin of the universe and the meaning of life and that kind of thing, because...
it's very real-life music, a lot of real experiences, a lot of vulnerable topics, but at the same time some very silly things, like one song is actually about Windows Vista.
I'm wondering how I can finish this off now.
Let's break something.
Let's break something. What the hell?
Well, we'll finish it off kind of like Good News Week does.
The Token Skeptic podcast is a fortnightly online interview show that takes a slightly more skeptical look at the world around us. Head to tokenskeptic.org.
The staff of Secular Coalition for America lobbies U.S. Congress on issues of separation of church and state, and they've become a powerhouse for change in the United States government. You'll definitely want to subscribe to receive their email action alerts. These are updates for important issues and ones that you can get involved with directly. And hopefully, you'll consider making a contribution to the Secular Coalition for America to help them continue fighting for your equality. You can do it all at secular.org.
Welcome back to the show. Today we are busting queer, trans, and atheist myths.
Mythbusters is off the air now, so now we have to do it.
Right? Yeah, they didn't respond to my letter about myth busting, so we're just doing it for them. Neither of us have red hair or a beret, though. I think is going to be a problem.
Yeah, I can grow a mustache, probably. A really wimpy one. Not anything like, the walrus one.
Well, that's okay. We'll get there. So this segment we're gonna do queer myths, and so queer, just to be clear, what we mean by queer is basically anyone who is not heterosexual. So this includes gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, anyone whose sexual orientation or sexual preferences aside from like the heteronormative standard. And obviously, the one that you hear so often is that we choose to be this way. And I just have to wonder how many of those people understand what being queer in our society is like. I'll save my rant about being trans being a choice for the next segment. But I mean, if you go to work and you hear people making all these gay jokes and talking about gay people being pedophiles and stuff like that, I mean, who chooses to put themselves into that whole thing? Like, just on a surface level. And then, when you dig down into it, I mean, homosexuality exists in many different species of animals. I'm a little unsure if bisexuality is something that people, or that we notice in the natural world. I would be surprised if it wasn't.
Yeah, I think bonobos are known to be pretty bisexual. Like, the majority of them will have sex with males and females.
There's lots of evidence to suggest that sexuality is a very complicated concept, influenced by lots and lots of different factors that science really doesn't understand all that much yet. So, and that also goes, for the extreme opposite of the argument. Ari, you added that to the sheet, and I think that's a great point. That the argument that it's 100% genetically determined, I think, is also a fallacious one.
Yeah, absolutely. From my studies in psychology, and hopefully when I get into a PhD program eventually and study the interaction of genetics and environment, pretty much almost everything other than obviously things like eye color and hair color are, at least things in psychology, are partially genetic and partially environment. Environment can be things like the way that you were raised, the way you interacted with your parents, your peers, your siblings. And there's also things like biological environment, which you might think of as genetics. But, for example, the ratio of hormones that you're exposed to when you are developing in your mother's uterus can also, have an impact on triggering certain genes to be expressed. So there is some emerging evidence that, for example, LGBT people might be exposed to different sorts of hormones when they're developing within their biological mothers. So, for example, there's a little bit of evidence. It's still coming up at this point, but there's a little bit of evidence that, for example, people who are assigned female at birth, who later identify as more along the masculine spectrum, are more likely to have been exposed to high levels of androgens in the womb. So, hormones like testosterone. It's linked to, for example, fertility drugs. When mothers are having trouble conceiving and they take fertility drugs, that often has an effect on the levels of androgens, typically male hormones within their system. And then they are more likely to have for example, if the child is assigned female at birth, have a child who later identifies as lesbian or as masculine trans.
That is super interesting. Like I had never heard it explained quite that succinctly. I'd kind of heard that generally speaking, but a little bit.
And there's still lots and lots of research to be done, but these are the kind of the preliminary results. And
right. Well, you explained it in a way that I understand it a little better. We'll put it that way. So I appreciate
educations.
And then, of course, the other thing that I think is important to point out when you're arguing about, because, like, for me, like, I would love to understand on an academic level, I would love to understand why I'm trans or why I'm queer, why I am the way that I am, because that stuff is just interesting to me. But I also think it's important at the end of the day to point out that whether or not it's a choice doesn't matter. It matters literally zero when you're talking about, whether or not someone deserves equality, whether or not someone deserves equal treatment, because, there are so many things in our culture, at least, that we hold as absolutely sacrosanct that are 100% a choice. The kind of clothes someone is allowed to wear, the religion that someone does or doesn't follow, the flags that someone wants to fly in their front yard, the way that someone wants to decorate their house, all of those things are considered, these things 100% belong to me, and no one else has the right to tell me that it's right or wrong because it is my choice. And none of anyone's choices in that realm are seen as a reason to discriminate against them or treat them as less than. So, even if by some argument I chose to be this way, it shouldn't really change anything at all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was America.
If you don't like it, you can get out.
Exactly. There you go.
God.
I feel like no illusions. Exactly.
So another one is this idea of sexual norms, and basically what we're kind of talking about here at this point is heteronormativity, and that's a really big word for the idea that everyone assumes everyone else is straight, is basically what it comes down to, and that anything else is an aberration. And if we're talking about, if we use the word normal to to describe the thing that happens 50% plus one of the time without any other connotation to it, sure. Being queer isn't normal. Being gay isn't normal. Being trans isn't normal. Because those are things that happen less than 50% plus one of the time. Mm-hmm. And that's fair. But I think attaching moral connotation to those norms is a problem.
Yeah, there's definitely a big difference between something being normal, as in it occurs naturally, and something being happening a majority of the time.
Right, exactly. And I mean, a lot of that goes back to, to the sex episode that we did, where there's just this one way that's assumed of sexuality, and it's, heterosexual, and it's, it leaves out anyone who is queer, anyone who is asexual or aromantic or any of those kind of things. And I think, the more and more we just kind of destroy all of those concepts, I think the better off we are. Because there are lots and lots of ways to experience sexuality, including not experiencing it at all. So
I like to think of it this way. This makes the most sense if you are someone who is more of a naturalist and not necessarily religious. If it occurs, then it is natural.
Yeah. Which is what, like, if you listen to people who are into skeptical activism talk, that's why they hate the word natural. Because if you're a person who doesn't believe in a supernatural force, literally everything around you is natural. Mm-hmm.
Supernatural makes no sense.
Well, right. And it's the idea, if a beaver dam is natural, why is a skyscraper not?
Because humans are different from animals for some reason.
Exactly, except that we're not. So, that's kind of the whole thing. And I mean, bringing that back to sexuality, I mean, there's homosexuality all across the animal kingdom and all throughout human history across many different types of cultures and peoples. So, it's not just this new, liberal invention.
Yeah, and that goes for the idea of monogamy versus non-monogamy and marriage as well. There are so many, throughout human history, so many different conceptions of what marriage is, of what relationships are. Monogamy has not always been the standard. That's just kind of our kind of modern Western perception of the way that relationships work. But that is, of course, not always the way that things have been.
Absolutely. So, and then the next few, these are, they're kind of, they're the ones that they're fun, but not fun, because it's like, if you don't laugh, you'll cry kind of thing. Yeah. So, there's obviously lots of, stereotypes surrounding, gay women. Lesbians want to be men, lesbians are automatically man-hating feminists, or lesbians are just bad with men, so they just decided that they wanted to be with women instead.
If you have short hair, then you're a lesbian.
Right.
Apparently I'm a lesbian, news to me.
Right, yeah. And I must not be, because I have really long hair.
Yeah.
So, and you know what? In fairness, all of those things are true some of the time.
As are a lot of things in the world.
Exactly.
Sometimes
there are lots of trans men who, as part of their journey, declare themselves as lesbians and, go through a very masculine presentation before coming to their own realization, or, getting up the courage to tell everyone around them that they are actually, a trans man. And that's all fine. But that's not something that anyone should ever assume about you. There are plenty of man-hating lesbian feminists. You will find, I suspect that those are not the majority of lesbians at all. I certainly do not hate men. Although I guess I'm not strictly a lesbian either, because I kind of like the men's a little
bit.
Yeah, guys are okay. They're
they're men.
Yeah, and in fairness, I have heard some people say that they are lesbian because they've had bad experiences with men, and they're just scared of being around men. But you know, part of me also thinks, and, you know, far be it for me to claim that I can get in anyone's head and decide what's in their head but, you know, I would think that there has to be some sort of natural tendency towards being that way for someone to just decide they're going to be that way in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, a person who is really 100% straight can't choose to be gay. And a person who is 100% gay can't just all of a sudden choose to be attracted.
They could choose to only have sex with the same sex, but they couldn't choose to like it. Exactly.
So, yeah, and that's, you know, I think if our society wasn't so uptight about sexual orientation, I think that we would find, I would think that we find that sexuality is a lot more fluid and a lot less rigid than most people think it to be. You know, that's far from throwing out there that stupid ass study that was like everyone's bisexual.
Yeah,
which is that's
or at
just
least
stupid.
all women are bisexual.
Yeah, which is 100% not true. I think there are probably a lot more of us out there than most people realize. But I definitely don't want to throw out the, you know, everyone's a little gay.
Totes.
Yeah. So another fun one, and by fun I mean awful, is that gay people are just like ready to have sex with anyone. And what you find a lot of times is that guys think this about gay guys. Like, straight guys think this about gay guys. Once they find out that a guy is gay, they're automatically uncomfortable because they
are you attracted to me? That's weird.
Yeah, like,
no, you're
because,
just my friend.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just, sorry, dude, not everyone thinks you're hot. Like, yeah, that's just, it's silly.
That's pretty self-explanatory, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and another good one, this one actually comes back to what you said earlier, was, you know, the fashion choices and outward presentation equals sexual orientation. And, you know, I tried having this discussion with a guy once, and he was like, and he was actually, I mean, he was asking this as a genuine question, because he admitted, like, he's like, this may be a really stupid and ignorant thing to say. I'm just trying to learn. So, like, I was trying to be, you know, nice and, you know, really explain things to him. And he was like, but, you know, why does it seem like every gay guy is super effeminate and, you know, has like flamboyant fashion sense, or, you know, every lesbian, you know, wears flannel and has short hair and, you know, that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, did you ever stop to think that, like, one, you're making assumptions about people based on their appearance, because unless you talk to every one of those people and find out they're actually gay, you don't know if they are or not.
Right.
Because there are plenty of masculine looking straight women or very effeminate straight men. And also, you're looking at someone who has a traditional femme presentation or a traditional masculine presentation and assuming they're straight because they, quote, look straight to you. You know, trying to point out the you know, only paying attention to the hits and ignoring the misses kind of cognitive bias thing. And he just didn't seem to get that.
Right, because when somebody sees, you know, a man who is dressed a certain way and is acting a certain way, they think, oh, that's a gay man. They don't actually ask that person if they're gay or not, or if they're even
Nor
a man.
Nor should they.
Yeah.
Hey, are you gay?
So in their mind,
like, just
they think,
checking.
oh, that's a gay man who's effeminate, and then they get into this kind of rut where they're thinking, oh, well, that was a gay man who was effeminate, so gay men are effeminate. Well, you didn't actually ask that person if he was gay or not. You don't know that person, so you don't know.
Yeah, and you even find this. I mean, you even find this problem sometimes in the queer community, that, you know, if a woman is too femme, she's not necessarily like cool enough to be in the lesbian circle. They're you know, that's not an experience that I've had, you know, since coming out and, you know, hanging out with other queer women and stuff like that. That's not an experience I've had, but it's definitely something that I've heard a lot of people feel like they have to, like, gay up their presentation, quote unquote, to be like, you know, part of the clique or whatever. And I mean, I have found myself doing that sometimes. I mean, you know, we all have problematic attitudes sometimes, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm an exception to that. I mean, I remember meeting someone when I very first started getting into queer activism, and I remember meeting someone who worked with an organization here, and I just remember thinking, like, man, it's really cool that a straight ally puts so much work into this whole thing. And I was assuming that she was straight because she had a very stereotypically feminine presentation and she didn't fit any of the gay stereotypes. And when she said something about being gay, I was like, wow, really? And I look back on that and I think like, wow, that was a really stupid attitude to have, because, I mean, I look a little different because I'm trans, but generally speaking, I mean, I have a very stereotypically feminine presentation. Like, I wear dresses and skirts and makeup and paint my nails and all that kind of stuff. Like I don't have a stereotypically like queer presentation. So like I should know better, but I still didn't because, we all have problematic attitudes.
Yep.
Which leads us to who's the man in the relationship?
Just stop.
Right. Like, can you not? Like, they're both the man. We're both the woman. That's the point.
Yeah. If we wanted a man in the relationship, we wouldn't be lesbians.
Exactly. Oh God. Yeah. It's just, and again, I think that sort of comes down to a cognitive bias sort of thing, because a lot of times you do see queer couples where there's one, various like in gay women couples, you see, one person who has a very butch, like sort of masculine presentation and one person who has a very feminine sort of stereotypically female presentation. So like it would be easy to convince yourself of that. But again, what you're doing is you're just paying attention to the hits and ignoring the misses. Because when you see two women together who look very stereotypically feminine, unless they're doing the PDA thing, you don't know that they're not a couple.
Yeah, you'll probably just assume that they're friends, and then you won't count them among the gay couples that you know of.
Exactly. And then another good one that I think to point out is that is the idea that sex is necessary for a relationship. And, this is something that's becoming more and more of a conversation in the queer community, and we're going to do an episode about it here very soon. I have an interested guest. We're just working out time stuff. The idea that sex is necessary for a relationship, because, there are people who are asexual, and, just like being homosexual or pansexual or bisexual, being asexual is not, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with someone. That's just sometimes the way people experience sexuality is to not experience it at all, or to experience it on a very, limited and conditional basis. And, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think, it can be pretty problematic to assume that, that's a thing that has to happen for a good relationship. So I thought that was important to mention. And then, and I love your category names, by the way. Ari organized the run sheet for this episode, and they did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
So the heading for this one is Queer is Weird. And so this one lumps in basically, the idea that queer people are, pedophiles and child molesters, and that it's a perversion of normal sexuality, or that you're going through a phase, that they're, it's a slippery slope from being gay to bestiality and all of this kind of stuff. And, again, just stop. I mean,
please just before you espouse these kind of opinions, get to know one queer person and see what happens to your opinion. Okay. So just looking at a bunch of different research online, the numbers are hard to find exactly, because a lot of definitions are different versus in one study versus another. But basically put, most people who abuse children, one, are men, and two, identify as heterosexual. Which is not a surprise, because most people identify as heterosexual.
Right? And I am going to go out on a limb here and say something that I don't think a lot of people agree with, but this is where the evidence has led me in saying that I do think pedophilia is a sexual orientation. Now, that doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it something that we shouldn't punish and something that we shouldn't stop. But I do think like kleptomania or anything like that. I do think people, anybody who does anything terrible, it's a bad idea to assume that they're monolithically terrible people.
Yeah.
And that like they're just awful and deserve to die, because that's generally not the case. There are people who have pedophilic urges that don't act on them because they know it's wrong. And, the point here, the point here before I go off on a super random tangent about this whole thing, is that sure, you will probably find gay people who are pedophiles, because there are people who are pedophiles and there are people who are gay, and the two shall meet at some point, I'm sure. But gay people are not pedophiles. Gay people are not a threat to your children. Gay people are not coming after your spouse. I don't know, they may be.
We can't speak for all the gays. There may be some gays who are
Right.
coming for your spouse.
And then there's the idea that that it's a mental illness, so that it's a phase or a fad. If you think it's a mental illness, basically you're going to have to go ahead and discredit basically every major organization of psychologists and psychiatrists that exists, because they all say that it's a natural variation in human sexuality.
But Callie, that is a conspiracy. It's part of
Right,
the gay
yeah,
agenda.
It's the gay agenda has paid them all this money to say this
All the money that we
and-
have. So much,
Right,
so
all
much
the
money.
money that
So
we
much
have.
money, you guys.
Elton John has been very generous to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, the phase or fad thing, again, like a person is not, a person can force themselves to have sex with a member of the same gender if they're straight. They can't force themselves to like it, like you said before. So if a person who otherwise identifies as straight decides to go have sex with somebody of the, the same gender or the same sex, maybe they're not all the way straight. It's a novel concept, but maybe that's just what it is. And you know what? Maybe they are just going through a phase. Maybe they're experimenting with their sexuality to figure out what they like. And that's all okay. They may settle back down and realize, like, no, I had gay sex and I didn't like it, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with the straight thing. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Or, I had gay sex and boy, was it awesome. So like, I'm going to stick with the gay thing. Like that's how these things work. We explore ourselves, we explore our personalities, we explore our sexuality to figure out what we like and who we are. And that's okay. But to dismiss it that way, I think is because that's what happens. It's dismissed that way. And that I think is super harmful and just not okay.
Yeah, the worst that could happen is that somebody says they're gay and they're not, and you take them at their word and you accept that they're gay. Whereas if you don't believe someone who actually is gay, that could be seriously damaging.
Absolutely.
So it is definitely, in my opinion, better to err on the side of caution and to accept what people are telling you about their sexuality, whether or not they decide to stick with that label for the rest of their lives.
100%. And there can be nothing more healthy than an honest exploration of that, as far as I'm concerned. As long as you're safe, of course. If you're going to have sex, do it safely. But by all means, do have it, because sex is awesome. Not everyone thinks so. We want to throw that out there, but
we love you, ace friends.
Yes, we do. We do very much so. So some more stuff surrounding kids. There's the idea that kids can't grow up properly if they don't have a mother and a father.
Which is so not supported by the science.
Well, right. And we can look at the science, and then I also look at my experience. Like, I was raised by a single mom for the majority of my childhood, and when she married my stepdad and I never got close. He provided for me financially, which I appreciate, But in terms of like a parent-child relationship, we never really had one. So I consider myself the product of a single-parent home. Simply because I never really had a relationship of any kind with my stepdad. And for someone to suggest that I would be worse off if I had had two of my mom around, like that's insulting. It's absolutely insulting and just incorrect. You know, I mean, my mom was awesome and she did the best that she could. She did a great job with me. I love my mom with all of my heart. If there had been two of her around, things might have been a little easier, you know, and to suggest that kids, because if you take that argument to its logical conclusion, you're also saying that every child of a single parent home is going to turn out screwed up.
Because they don't have a mommy and a daddy like normal kids. Right.
Which is, I mean, that's patently false. And then again, you know, if you go and you look at the science, I mean, study after study after study has confirmed that like any issue that kids of gay parents have stems back to them being bullied for having gay parents. Like,
which
that's
is not
the only problem.
Fault of the gay parents. It's the fault of the stupid kids and the stupid adults that are around them that are bullying them for that.
Exactly. And then, of course, that's when people engage in the victim blaming thing like, well, I'm not against it. I don't have anything against gay people. That's a hard life for a kid and no one should put their kid through that. It's the same thing people said about biracial relationships. I don't hate black people. I just think that they shouldn't mix because those kids are going to have such a hard time. Stop it. Stop victim blaming.
They'll have a hard time when people like you make their lives miserable. But
exactly.
If you accept that there are different types of families in this world and treat children all equally, then they will be totally fine.
Yep. And then, and this one is fun, that we recruit children.
I'm totally going into elementary
lifestyle.
Schools. Hey kids, you want to try some gay? It's fun.
Like, God, it's so funny to me, the paranoid world that these people live in. Like, I don't. And of course, what this stems from is the idea that there are so many people out there trying to be like, hey, like, if this is who you are, it's okay, you know, and they reinterpret that to mean that we're now recruiting instead of the fact that we're just letting you know, like, hey, you know what, like, little boy or little girl, if you feel like you're attracted to other boys or if you're attracted to other girls, like, that's okay. That's a normal variation of human sexuality. There's nothing wrong with that. And I mean, think how many kids' lives would be saved by just that. You know, this is a normal thing. You're okay for being this way.
Yeah, I feel like it stems a lot from the fundamentalist Christian persecution complex that if we can't, rule over everyone else's lives, then we're being persecuted because we used to be able to have all these privileges and tell, everyone that you have to live the way that we tell you to live. And now that we can't do that anymore, that's persecution.
Yes. Loss of privilege equals persecution.
Le barf.
Yeah. And then there are a couple of these that apply to bisexual and pansexual people that I think are important to call out.
What? No, bisexual people, they don't matter.
Right. God.
Is that even really a thing?
I love you, Trav. So
I hate Trav.
Oh wow. Okay. There's the idea that people who claim to be bisexual just want to have lots of sex. And first of all, if that were true, who cares? And second of all, it's not true. And just to strictly define the difference between bisexual and pansexual, because that's something that comes up often, is bisexual is most often defined as someone who is attracted to their own gender and other genders as well. So it's not necessarily a binary thing where you're attracted to both men and women. They can be attracted to non-binary genders as well. the idea is that your sexual orientation goes in one direction and it goes in another direction as well, hence the bi prefix. What it means to be pansexual is that gender is completely irrelevant to your attractions. So someone who is bisexual can be attracted to any number of different genders, but generally gender factors in to the attraction. And pansexual means that it doesn't factor in at all, that you're just attracted to people, and then the parts and all that sort of stuff don't matter. So just to throw that out there, that's the difference.
And there are debates among the two camps about the
Yes.
definitions, but those are the most agreed upon definitions.
Right, exactly. And, I used to call myself bisexual. I think pansexual probably fits a little better now, but I've just settled on, I'm just going to call myself queer, because that's
It's
all
a little less hassle that way, I guess.
Yes. And the other one is that, bisexual or pansexual people need to pick a side, or that, those, or that those orientations don't exist and it's just something that somebody made up, which is just stupid. I mean, it's just like saying, like, you can't like vanilla and chocolate both.
Nope.
Like, you have to pick one, because we're at war. Pick a side. It's just it's silly. I have found my sexual and romantic attractions going lots of different places in all different variations of gender and sex and genital arrangements and all of that sort of stuff. So like, trust me when I say I exist.
That's a pretty good rule to use. Trust people when they say they exist.
Well, right. I mean, how hard is it to say when someone says, like, you know what, gender doesn't really matter to me and how I'm attracted to people. I just kind of like sexy people.
No, you don't. You're actually gay. I know better than you do.
Oh, God. And what's funny, I mean, that people actually say that to people like us all the time.
Yep.
And it's just...
That's what happened when I was outed to my mom, as at the time I used the label bisexual, but now I consider myself pansexual. She said, well, if you're attracted to women in any capacity, then that means you're lesbian. And I said, no, I'm attracted to lots of different types of people. There are more than just black and white.
Dumb. People are dumb. All right.
Especially
we're going to take another quick break here. Yeah. We're going to take another quick break here, and we're going to come back, and we're going to bust some myths about trans people.
We're going to bust
you'll
some
find
trans
there's a lot of
people.
intersection. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to bust some trans people.
No,
God.
we're not going to do that.
No, we are most certainly not going to do that. More Gaytheist Manifesto after this.
Hello, I'm Alan Cumming. Live Out Loud is calling on the LGBT community to help improve life for gay teens. Take what you know and gay it forward through the Homecoming Project, a chance to return to your old high school and share your story with LGBTQ youth. Your life experiences and wisdom can prove invaluable to teens who may be struggling with their own identities and paths in life. One day can make a lasting difference. Gay it forward with the Homecoming Project. Find us at liveoutloud.info to learn how you can get involved today.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Thank you so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff, like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. And welcome back to the show. This segment, we are going to be busting some myths about trans people. So
the scary transgenders.
Those weird transgenders.
Yes.
And you know, we laugh about a lot of this stuff because a lot of this stuff is, it's kind of funny in the sense that it's like, holy crap, this is ridiculous. But a thing that's important to point out, I think, something that's really important to make sure that people get is that when it comes to trans people, and even queer people to some extent, but I think trans people are probably disproportionately affected by this. But the kind of attitudes that we're going to be talking about actually a lot of times will get people killed. And that includes, that includes people being murdered, and that includes people committing suicide. So, there's stuff to laugh at because of how ridiculous these people are. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that, the things that we're talking about, the attitude, the underlying attitudes and the things that we're talking about actually do mean, the quality of people's lives, as well as their very lives themselves. As much as we're probably going to laugh at how ridiculous this stuff is, I think that's an important thing to point out at the beginning of the segment. Segueing into that, I think, we all watched the Houston Equal Rights Amendment fail, and the advertising campaign that surrounded that whole thing, basically calling transgender people pedophiles and rapists and sexual predators,
men in women's bathrooms.
Exactly. And
I'm from Houston, so don't make fun of my southern accent.
No, it's a good accent.
Thanks.
And you even hear more well-meaning people say that they don't even think that trans women are a threat. What they're afraid of is cis men taking advantage of these laws to get into bathrooms and hurt people. Which, first of all, I want to be like, yes, please, let's have a discussion about how making me more equal is going to hurt cisgender people. Like, let's talk about my rights in terms of how it affects you, please, because that's not a stupid thing to do. But I mean, the point is these things just don't happen. Both, the myth of the trans person in the bathroom to be a sexual predator and hurt someone, or the cisgender guy taking advantage of those non-discrimination laws to cause someone harm. Those things just haven't happened. There are several states and even more municipalities that have these inclusive laws that prohibit discrimination based on gender identity and public accommodations. And these things simply just have not happened. The thing is, people who are sexual predators don't need an invitation to be sexual predators. There is not going to be a person that's like, boy, you know what? I really wish that I could assault someone, but those pesky laws, if someone would just change the law, I could get into this bathroom and assault somebody. That sounds ridiculous because it is exactly that ridiculous. And anyone who wants to know, go back and listen to episode 4 where we're talking about trans bathroom bills, and I just kind of lose my shit on the air crying because this stuff scares the hell out of me. Every time I go into a public bathroom, it's in the back of my mind that I may not walk out of there because someone decides that I'm in the wrong bathroom and they want to make an issue of it. Or, they want to call the police and get me arrested and cause me problems. All of those things do happen to people. Trans people hurting other people in bathrooms does not happen. Trans people being hurt in bathrooms absolutely does happen.
Trans people are way too worried about their own safety to be, creeping on other people.
Absolutely. That's not every trans person in the world has bathroom anxiety, but I will tell you that almost every trans person I know does, including myself. And that, that goes from a low level, like it's in the back of my head anxiety, to like, I'm really shaking and I'd rather just hold it for 4 hours than use a public bathroom kind of anxiety.
I've heard of people who haven't used public bathrooms in literally years because they're scared of what might happen.
Well, yeah, and I have walked ridiculous distances. I was at a convention once, and I walked to literally the opposite side of the convention center. This gigantic convention center in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. I walked to literally the opposite side, and it was about a mile to use the bathroom because I wanted to be in a place where no one else was, just to be safe. And trans people do have a justified reason to be nervous in the bathroom. Cis people do not have a justified reason to be uncomfortable around trans people in the bathroom, because I promise you, we are already probably scared to death to be there.
I also promise you, you are already using the bathroom with trans people.
Yes, absolutely. And this goes to another myth about trans people, is that you can always tell someone is trans by looking at them. Which is absolutely false. Whether you're talking about someone who is trans and who has decided to not change their outward presentation, or someone whose presentation passes so well that you would never know otherwise. So, that's when, people say, oh, I've never met a trans person before. I promise you have. You have. You probably just didn't know.
I think it's estimated at like 1% of the population, something like that, maybe a little less than 1%. So if you've met 100 people, you've probably met a trans person.
Right. Well, and those numbers fluctuate, obviously, because there are a lot of people who are so scared of being outed they won't even answer anonymous surveys. I've heard estimates as high as like 3 to 5% based on some surveys. I think that's a number it's just going to be a long time before we can really get an accurate picture of just how many of us are there. What I can say for almost certain is that there are far more of us than most people realize. That's really as far as I'm willing to assert. And that also leads into the idea that, being trans is a mental illness, or that we're delusional. And, the DSM did define gender dysphoria, or, what do they call it?
Gender identity disorder.
There it is. Gender identity disorder.
That was in the DSM-4. The most recent DSM is the DSM-5, and it has changed to gender dysphoria, which has different criteria.
Right. Which honestly I'm fine with. That makes sense to me, because being trans is it's not a mental illness. Being trans correlates with higher levels of mental illness, which is a result of minority stress, which is something. Go Google minority stress and it'll answer a lot of questions for you. Because I was shocked. I was like, wow, this thing that I've been describing for so long is something that psychologists have actually studied, and there's a word for it. And that even follows into, I think a lot of people are under the mistaken impression that being trans even if you don't think that being trans is a mental illness, a lot of people will think that being trans automatically means that you're depressed, or that you're anxious, or that you have some sort of trauma in your past, or, that there's the stereotype that if you're a trans, you're just kind of a mess as a person. And for sure, I mean, that describes some of us, a lot of us, maybe, I don't know. But it's a reverse correlation. It's a lot of mental illnesses that trans people have stem from minority stress and the society that we live in, and not being accepted by our parents and our friends and our families. And that causes the kind of stress that leads to mental illness. It's not the mental illness causing you to be trans. It's the other way around. Right.
Which is exactly why in the most recent version of the DSM, they had changed it from gender identity disorder, which is if you are transgender, then you have a disorder, basically, to gender dysphoria. And the difference being that gender dysphoria is not necessarily in and of itself an illness. Mental illness is typically defined as any kind of mental or emotional psychopathology that can interfere with your ability to lead your day-to-day life. It makes it difficult for you to go to school, for you to go to work and perform the way that you normally would if you weren't having this sort of issue. Be in relationships. It affects your family life, your friend life, your personal emotional life. And through the research, they found that trans people, when they have the right sort of support system and are given the right access to medical care, if they choose medical care, they don't have these sorts of issues. It's only in the cases where they are experiencing bigotry, experiencing alienation, lack of access to healthcare, whether it's transition related or non-transition related, being isolated from family and friends, having trouble in relationships, that is when they become at increased risk for anxiety and depression. It's not the being trans that directly translates into anxiety, depression, and other illnesses. It's all the things that go along with being trans in our society.
Absolutely. That's a really good explanation of that.
Thanks, psych degree.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I should have probably just stopped and just let you say the whole thing, because that's good stuff. And this is one that I've started to see so much, and it makes me want to strangle people. When people are talking, like, like, I'm attack helicopter kin. Like, I identify as a wolf, or I identify as a fighter jet. Like, taking that as, comparing that as being ridiculous, as being trans. And here's the thing. I fancy myself a skeptic, right? So I try my best to not believe things without evidence for them. And if you look at the considered opinion of the people who study this stuff, psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals, medical professionals, they generally universally agree that being transgender is a real thing. Not only that it's a real thing, but transition to whatever degree the person feels is necessary is the only way to relieve the discomfort that comes along with being that way. There is no such evidence for other things like I identify as a wolf or I identify as a fighter jet.
And to be fair, that's all kind of new things, and I don't know of any research in that area at the moment. There might be some in the works, but if it turns out that when research comes out and it says this is actually a thing, if it is a thing, okay, then I will believe it because science.
100%. Because that's the whole point, is that yes, I will believe something that sounds that ridiculous if there's good evidence for it, because that's what you're supposed to do when you're a person who cares about the scientific method. So and of course this is another one, and of course this is something that basically gets thrown at every minority group. Black people hate white people, gay people hate straight people, and that trans people hate cis people, and that we use cis as a slur. And I've had so many of these conversations with people that they get really frustrating. So just to set the base here, cisgender is the opposite of transgender. So a transgender person is a person who is assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth and doesn't actually identify as the thing they were assigned at birth. That's the definition of what it means to be a trans person. Okay. Being a cisgender person simply means that you agree with what you were assigned at birth. So you were assigned male at birth, and you're comfortable identifying that way, or that way with female. Obviously, most people are cis. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But what people take it as, well, let me back up for a second. Not how people take it as. The idea of having a word for cisgender is to prevent us from having the concept of, well, there are normal people and then there are transgender people. It's a very othering concept to say that, there are normal people and then there are trans people. Instead, we can say, hey, when it comes to gender identity, there are two kinds of people. There are trans people and there are cis people. Because as science has demonstrated, as medical and mental health professionals agree, being transgender is a normal variation of the human experience. It's not common, but it's a normal variation on the way that humans experience their identities. And so to other it that way gives us the impression that there is something wrong with being that way. So what we do is say, well, no, okay, so there's a word for describing people who are that way and a word for describing people who aren't that way. It's a very simple concept. But what you run into is people who are used to the privilege of being seen as the normal group see the loss of that privilege as an insult, or as being othered themselves. And, and it goes back to that saying. I say it all the time, and I don't remember who originated the quote, but it's, when you've had an unjustified privilege for so long, losing that privilege begins to feel like oppression. Even though it's obviously not oppression, it's just other people getting the benefit, the same benefit that you have. You know what? We're going to, society, certain segments of society anyways, have decided that they're going to treat trans people like we're normal people, because we are.
What?
Right.
We're normal?
Like, what a concept.
I'm so confused. I thought I was weird this whole time.
Yeah, and there's this whole thing, and obviously there are people who are ridiculous in every movement. We acknowledge that. There are the Tumblrina social justice warriors that everyone hates, that are really annoying, but what you often run into is people wanting to paint the entirety of the movement that way, or the entirety of the group that way, because it's a convenient way to not take us seriously. But you hear, die cis scum, which I
totally
started
endorse
as a
that
joke
statement.
thing. Right. And that whole thing, it started as a joke among trans people about the way that we're treated in society. And someone wanted to come in, and take it in, evidence as like, oh, well, like us normal people are like being oppressed because people want us to die. And, yeah, just
I totally want my cis partner of 5 years to die.
Right,
I
exactly.
hate him
Or
because he's cis.
like my cis mother, my cis brother, my cis sister,
my cis, almost
all of
everyone
my cis
in my
friends,
whole entire life.
Like, yes, I just want them to die, and I hate them all.
I hate them all. They're the worst.
Just
Society of trans people.
Right. Yeah. Where we're all on hormones and no one can reproduce. God. God. So another one, and this comes back, comes back to what we were talking about with being queer, is that kids are too young to know their gender identity, and it's really interesting when you hear people have these conversations, because when anytime a young boy interacts with a young girl, like, oh, they're so cute, look at them, like they're like, that boy's being a boy and that girl's being a girl, and no one questions that. No one says like, they're acting like a boy, I don't know if that's okay, like I think they're too young to know. No, you're putting your assumptions on that kid, and when they step outside of your assumptions, you assume that something is wrong. You knew what you were when you were a kid. The only difference was everyone around you was repeating what you knew or felt to be true. And with trans people, oftentimes we don't have that luxury. And not every trans person knows that they're trans when there are some people who will straight up tell you they had no idea they were trans until they were in their 50s, and that's all fine. But when we're talking about kids who express these things, saying that they're too young to know, it's just not true, because you knew your gender when you were a kid. And what this stems from, I think, is an aversion to the idea that we should be doing medical intervention for kids who identify as trans. And what I think most people don't understand, and most of the people who cry loudly at this have obviously made no even effort to understand, is that irreversible medical intervention doesn't happen until someone's in their late teens anyways. When a kid is like 5 or 6 and they express that they're trans, supporting them literally means saying, you know what, I'm going to call you a different name. I'm going to let you style your hair differently. I'm going to let you wear different clothes and let you play with different toys. There's nothing irreversible about supporting a young kid when they express that they're trans. And I think that's what people have an aversion to. And sure, I'm with that to a certain degree. Obviously, you're not going to perform surgery on a 5-year-old because they seem to step outside of gender roles. And the thing is, no one's suggesting that people should do that. Basically, what happens is around the time that puberty starts, Sometimes kids will get put on puberty blockers to delay puberty. We're not talking about cross-sex hormone therapy, which can have irreversible changes. We're talking about delaying puberty while a kid is in intense psychotherapy, living as their preferred gender, and doing all of these things to make sure that this is a real thing for this kid. And then eventually, 14, 15, 16, they start cross-sex hormone therapy. And at, 18, 19-ish, they can have surgery. So, we're not talking about giving hormones to 5-year-olds and performing surgery on 10-year-olds. That stuff just doesn't happen. And so many people, I think, don't even bother to do the research on what this means. But what kids are doing is committing suicide at that age. It's hard to express what it's like to be a kid and have everyone around you telling you a thing that is not true. And especially if you're a kid who actually, has the courage to come out and say this, no, like, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. And everyone around you doesn't believe you and suppresses that in you. I mean, that's the thing that ends up with people committing suicide. And that's why trans kids kill themselves. So it's, again, it's something to take incredibly seriously, even with, the ridiculousness of these people's attitudes. It's something to take seriously because, this literally means dead kids, like that, period. So that's my rant on that. So another one that's, and this is funny because Jen from the last episode got this reaction from one of her parents. The idea that trans people are just extra gay. Mm-hmm. And especially trans women. I think this is true. I think the especially trans women part is true, mostly because society doesn't even recognize that trans men exist. Which is obviously silly. Trans men very obviously do exist. But if you remember in the last episode, I think it was Jen's dad said, well, have you tried just being gay?
Well, I tried that. It didn't really work out for me.
Right. And if I remember correctly, that used to be kind of the medical establishment's opinion on trans people, was that they were so gay, they just decided to be the other gender.
So very gay.
One of the interesting things about this is that there are some places like in Iran, being trans is okay. Being gay is not. So they will actually force gay men to undergo sex changes. So at that point, they're heterosexual.
Anything to not be gay, I guess. I'm not sure how that works.
Right. Which, God, how horrifying is that? Like, I can imagine how good it would feel to have, the right arrangements down there and then have that taken away from me. And then the next one kind of leads into what I said before, that the vast majority of trans people are assigned male at birth, and there is some evidence to support this. Most trans people are assigned male at birth and are like trans feminine people, but that is definitely not a blanket statement, and it's not an immutable truth. When society thinks of transgender in general, what they see is a white transgender woman, typically. Most people don't even think about, trans men, let alone, holy crap, non-binary people.
Whoa.
Right?
Throwing a wrench in that.
Yeah. So, and honestly, I think a lot of this may go back to the idea of, so like in the last segment, we talked about heteronormativity. This is more about cis normativity, where, being a cisgender is assumed to be the norm. So if you see someone who, quote, passes, you assume that they're not trans. So, generally speaking, in terms of appearance, hormones do more for trans masculine folks than they do for trans feminine folks. This is generally speaking. This is not like an immutable rule by any stretch of the imagination. But generally speaking, what you will find is trans masculine folks tend to blend better in with their cis counterparts than trans feminine people do. And so what you see is a sort of invisibility there, because people can see someone who looks, you can see a woman who looks masculine and they assume that's a trans woman. So those are people that they see sometimes. But because a lot of trans masculine people a lot of times are generally indistinguishable from cis men, then they kind of become invisible. So I think that's probably the explanation for that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of probably trans misogyny going on, which is the, misogyny, but applied to trans women, basically. So, like, if someone who's assigned female at birth is looking a little more masculine and wearing, like, I don't know, like pants, that's just normal. Women, people who are assigned female at birth are allowed to wear those sorts of things and look more masculine. Whereas if you're assigned male at birth, but you look more feminine, you wear a dress, you wear makeup, you have long hair, that kind of thing, all of a sudden that's a big deal. So people are more likely to notice that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. And then, there's the whole thing about cross-dressing and, drag queens and all of that kind of stuff. And, those are all discrete concepts. Someone who cross-dresses is not necessarily trans. A lot of people are, and there are a lot of people who think that cross-dressing is a thing and then it turns out they're trans. That was sort of a stage of denial that I went through. Just thinking that cross-dressing was a thing that I enjoyed and, kind of letting it be at that. And I eventually had to admit to myself it was more than that. But there are some people who are just comfortable cross-dressing, and there's nothing wrong with that.
It's just clothes, people.
Exactly. So, but those are discrete concepts. Changing your outward presentation doesn't necessarily mean that you're trans, and being trans doesn't necessarily mean changing your outward presentation. So, I think the whole the whole message here is to just kind of check your assumptions, I think, more than anything. But and then there's there's lots of stuff about non-binary people. So like,
we're mystical unicorns. We want to be special snowflakes.
Exactly. So, the first myth to bust about non-binary trans people is that they don't exist, because
hey, people, I'm
pretty
right
sure
here.
Ari exists. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Ari exists. We haven't met in person yet, but I'm anticipating that happening, and I have a pretty good amount of faith that Ari is actually
faith.
real.
I thought you were an atheist.
Oh, you caught me.
Boom.
So let me ask you this, because this is one that you put in here that I haven't, not one that I've necessarily heard about. People assuming your sexual orientation because you're a non-binary trans person. Talk to me about that.
I guess it kind of depends. If somebody doesn't know you're non-binary, I guess it would just depend on the way that you present. For example, since I have short hair and dress kind of tomboyish and appear feminine to most people, I think a lot of people assume that I'm a lesbian and are maybe a little surprised when it turns out my partner is a cis man. If you're someone who is like really out and proud about being non-binary, I would assume that most people would probably think you're bisexual or pansexual, because like, oh, you don't believe in gender, so everyone is the same to you. Right. But of course, everyone is an individual.
So that's when you get people asking, what are you?
Human. I'm a sandwich. I identify as a sandwich.
I'm a pastrami on rye.
Sandwich pronouns. Sandwich spilled sandwiches milk all over sandwich self.
Oh God. So speaking of pronouns, to wrap the segment up here, that non-binary pronouns are grammatically incorrect and weird. So two things. One, they're not grammatically incorrect. Two, sure, they may be a little weird if you're not used to them, but that's your problem, not the non-binary person who's asking you to use them's problem.
Oh my gosh, I have such a rant on these things. Okay, so for they, them, theirs pronouns, a lot of people say, well, that's plural, that's not singular. Okay, well, let's say, for example, that you are getting a phone call and somebody else answers the phone for you and says, oh, there's someone on the phone for you. Would you say, what does he or she want? You would probably say, what do they want? Because he or she is a little bit awkward, and that's technically how you would put it in, I don't know, like MLA format, but I think that's kind of changing these days. But in spoken English, people hardly ever use he or her pronouns. It's usually, if they're not sure of the person's gender, it's usually they would use they, them, their pronouns, like I just did. They would use that. Did that seem awkward to you? I don't know. It didn't seem awkward to me. So it's not technically grammatically incorrect as far as for example, like Z pronouns. That is something that a lot of people have problems with because they say, well, it's made up. Well, so is language. Right. Language is made up. It didn't descend down from heaven. It didn't come, in fully printed form like the Bible did, obviously, which just descended from heaven and humans had no input into it whatsoever. Language is fluid. Language changes to suit our needs, and this is a need that people have. So I think if you're trying to decide between being quote-unquote grammatically correct and respecting someone's identity, I think it would be probably the less douchebag thing to respect someone's identity.
Yes. Always choose the less douchebag option. That's like 100% a rule there. Well, and it's so funny to me when people say something like, oh, that's made up. Like, says the person who uses every slang word that's ever been invented by anyone ever.
Yo, dudes, that's like totes made up.
Like, so when I go back, and look at your homophobic ass's profile, and I see you calling somebody a faggot, I'm sure you meant to call them a bundle of sticks, right? Like, that's what you were using because you don't want to use made up language, right? Like, just stop it. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so, using non-binary pronouns can be a bit of adjustment. That's fine. But, like, if you're not even willing to make the effort, you're a jerk. Period.
Snap my fingers at you. I snap my fingers in a Z formation.
Because, well, I mean, like you said, if we have to change our grammar up a little bit to be more inclusive and to respect people's identity, why wouldn't we want to do that? Why wouldn't we want to evolve our language to better describe people and their identities and to better respect people, as they identify? I can't see how that's at all possibly bad.
'Cause my grammars, I really respect my grammars.
Aside from the idea of I don't like change.
Yeah. I just want an excuse to not have to deal with your whole deal, which is confusing my ideas of gender that have been programmed into me from birth.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Well, this has been a very long episode, and it's all been good stuff. I'm not going to edit it down because
except for the
there's so
awkward
much
pauses,
good stuff in
you
here.
should probably.
But yeah, the awkward pauses, we'll get rid of those. But before we go, I do want to make one announcement. I have been chosen to give a workshop at the Keystone Trans Conference in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on March 11th. It's gonna be really cool. I'm gonna be giving a presentation about atheism at the trans conference there, and it'll be interesting because if you look in the booklet for the conference, the rules of the conference are very, very binary and very, very cisnormative. So yeah, it'll be an interesting dynamic for sure. So yeah, but I'm going to be giving I'm probably going to be giving a variation on the talk if anyone remembers the talk that I gave at the Glisten Youth Summit. It'll probably be a slightly modified version of that talk, just kind of updated based on stuff that worked well and didn't work well, at that time. So I'm really excited for that. The only other confirmed thing that I have at this point is the American Humanist Association conference. That's May 26th through 28th. I'm going to be giving a talk there on Saturday. So that's going to be cool if you're in the Chicago area or close to it.
Such as moi.
Come out, hang out. It'll be a good time. I'm very, very excited to be giving a talk at that conference. And there's some other stuff in the works, so just kind of keep an eye out on the Facebook and on the show here, and I'll be talking about all that kind of stuff. It's going to be an insanely busy year, so I'm super, super excited. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I don't have any guests to thank, but I do want to thank my co-host, Ari.
Thanks, Callie.
And you can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Gaytheist Callie.
I am on Facebook at Ari Coleman.
And you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.